Welcome back to Roundhouse Radio 98.3. I'm Kirk LaPointe. I'm your host every night between 6 and 8 o'clock. We've been spending the last week or so starting to look at the ridings in the Vancouver area and particularly talking to the principal candidates in each of the ridings. This half hour, we're looking at Vancouver-Point Grey. The MLA for the district is David Eby of the NDP. I'm also welcoming to the program Amanda Konkin, who's here representing the Greens, and James Lombardi for the BC Liberals. I want to thank you all for coming in. Let's try to have a good, vigorous discussion, maybe move it into debate realm. But let's find out a little bit about what drives you to be an MLA in the first instance. Amanda, why don't you start with me?
Thank you for having us on the show.
No, it's great.
Well, I want to be an MLA because I believe that it's the best way to bring change into our politics here in British Columbia. As Andrew Weaver often mentions, the leader of the party, the BC Greens candidates are all people that are working and living in British Columbia and realize that we have an obligation to step aside from our careers and try to make a difference. And that's definitely one of the reasons why I got into this. I was thinking about the state of politics and I was having many sleepless nights and knowing that I could do something.
Being in politics, I think, also gives you sleepless nights, just to let you know, Amanda.
That is
I've heard
very correct. Yeah. But I just looked around and said, who do my beliefs most align with? Which policies am I really excited about? And I've lived in Vancouver-Point Grey since I moved out here. I think I spent 1 year in the last 10 years, not particularly in that riding, but working in that riding. And it was the most obvious choice. I know those constituents. I am one of them. I've been there for many years, and I know the needs of that community. I transitioned from a student into a resident in the Broadway corridor in Kitsilano, and I thought that if I was going to make a difference anywhere, it was definitely going to be there.
Yeah. James Lombardi, you're also a new person in seeking public office. You have a background in community work, obviously, and you know the riding, as does David Eby. James, tell me a little bit about your own aspirations and why being an MLA is important to you.
Thanks, Kirk. As you mentioned, I did spend my career in the charitable sector. I was the head of business development and the director of We Day at Free the Children, a pretty well-known Canadian charity. And
a very good day, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Loud one. We accomplished a lot there. We inspired young people to volunteer 19 million hours of service, $62 million raised for 4,000 different charities. But for all that we accomplished, you can only take the issue so far at the charitable scale. And I ultimately want to move the needle even further in government. And I think we have a tremendous foundation to build on, thanks to the track record of this BC Liberal government. We have the strongest economy in the country. We have amongst the top student outcomes in the entire country and third best in the English-speaking world. We have the best healthcare outcomes in all of Canada. So I look at that progress and I see a real opportunity to continue to invest in social and environmental programs. And for Point Grey specifically, much like Amanda, and I would venture much like David, I've called Point Grey home for a very long time. And, I think this community in particular deserves a seat at the table of government so that we can deliver on the challenges that we face.
David, you're still, I think, a relatively new MLA. You've had a background in civil liberties, in the riding and in the city, of course, even across the province. What made you, almost in James's words, want to take it to that next level? What is it about you that made you want to be an MLA and pursue the work that you had done in the legal world, social justice world, into public life?
Well, I'd just like to begin by saying thanks very much for the invitation. It's inspirational to hear the reasons for my opponents in this election, why they're running. I think they're running for the right reasons. And it's very good to see people participating in politics in this way. For myself, the reason why I got into politics in the first place was I was working in the downtown east side and I saw my clients, I was practicing law, who were being mass evicted from single room occupancy hotels. And I was going to city council and I was trying to encourage city council to use a law called the Standards of Maintenance Bylaw that allowed them to go in and make repairs in the buildings and build them back to the landlords instead of evicting all the residents to the street. And I was unsuccessful and I finally decided, well, you know what? What I need to do is I need to run for city council. It was a very overconfident, frankly, it was a very overconfident assessment of where I was at in my career, but it was very instructional and I learned a lot doing it about how the political system worked. And even though I was unsuccessful in the race, that issue of using the standards of maintenance bylaw in that way became an issue in the campaign. And ultimately, some changes were made in that I thought were very important.
So you saw the capacity to change the conversation.
Exactly right. It seemed like an incredibly powerful way. It was 2 months of work on the campaign when I'd spent so much time trying to go to court and not achieve the same results. Politics is a very important and a powerful tool when used properly.
Yeah. So James, how does the conversation need to change then? I mean, David sort of saw his way into it. What would you want to change about the conversation we have right now?
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with the conversation that David just had. I think it's a very admirable reason to want to get into politics. I think certainly when you look at our political landscape, I'd love to see us shift away from some of the polarization that we see. I think in a world where a lot of people are struggling with the effects, both good and bad, of globalization and free trade and generational changes. It's quite tempting to play into the hand of the politics of anger and division. And my approach in the charitable sector has always been much different than that. I want to look at big, lofty problems, and I want to put a positive agenda forward for how we can actually move that forward. And, for all the criticism sometimes that the BC Liberals take, I think when you look at our platform, when you look at our social media, and when you look at the messages being carried forward by candidates across this province, it's overwhelmingly a positive message, one focused on solutions and what we can do to make lives better for British Columbians. And, that's the debate I'm interested in having.
We're more than halfway now through the campaign, Amanda, and I want to hear from you about, as you're knocking on doors, ringing doorbells, you probably go to sleep hearing doorbells through doors and with sore knuckles. What are you hearing? What are you hearing on the street?
I'm hearing people wanting change. And one thing that's really interesting running for the Greens, I mean, we've been around since the 80s, and people always know that we're there and we have something to offer. And this is the first time, at least in my experience, that I've seen a real positive influx of people realizing that there is this viable option out there and that people are starting to see that they could have some change.
Why isn't the NDP the viable option as a change engine?
Well, I mean, they've been around since the 30s in one way or another and had many opportunities to provide a new way of thinking about things. And constantly when I talk to people, and I mean, David is my MLA, and I think there's many issues that he's brought up that have really helped our constituents. But constantly, when I hear people talking, I don't hear people saying that they want one way or another. They want something different, not what's always been offered to them, and they're afraid to take that leap. And I think this is the first time that we're allowing people to see that there is a viable option to change the way that politics has been done. People are just scared of that. And I think a lot of it, this fear-mongering, leads to people not wanting to come out to vote. I mean, we have, 45% of eligible voters that think they don't have a choice. And people are scared because if those 45% came out and voted for what they wanted, we would see dramatically different politics in British Columbia. And I think that the biggest thing I'm excited about this election is that that voice of change and hope is starting to be heard. And I really hope that we'll see some results of that.
Do any of you subscribe to the view that voting ought to be mandatory?
No, no, I don't.
No, David?
I think it's really important for politicians to see how many people are showing up and voting, because it's an important indicator of a couple of things. One is how engaged people feel in the process generally, whether they feel they can make a difference through voting. And the second is really whether we need to be doing a better job of ensuring that people understand the impact that their vote can have. If you make voting mandatory, in my experience, the people who are going to be paying the fines, the people who are going to be chased down as breaking that law, tend to be more marginalized people. They're going to be people who are already on the fringes in one way or the other, and they're going to be punished one more time for being excluded and being on the fringes. If you make it mandatory too, you won't see whether or not the politics that are on offer are inspiring to people, whether they're encouraging people to come out, whether they see that they can make a difference. Yeah. And you can't fix it if you don't know if it's broken.
So it's by compliance, not by commitment, James?
Yeah, I mean, my hope would be that long term we wouldn't need measures like that. I mean, I think the generation that's coming up right now, despite the reputation perhaps as a lost generation, and I mean, I'm a millennial myself, but they're incredibly engaged. They know the issues. I think they're far less partisan and ideological than perhaps their parents in previous generations. And they're just looking for people who reflect their values and are going to, bring them the opportunities they need to thrive in life. And I think that's what we're trying to do as a BC Liberal Party. I mean, we're bringing ride sharing to British Columbia by the end of this year. We're partnering with them on their down payment. We're creating, 220,000 jobs in this province, including a bustling tech sector that's paying well above average salary. So I think those are the sorts of opportunities that can bring young people out to the ballot box, and we've certainly been working hard to change that dynamic in Point Grey.
Let's take a small break here with our panel of candidates. Amanda Konkin is with the Greens, James Lombardi with the BC Liberals, and David Eby with the NDP. We're going to come back after the break and continue our conversation about issues in Vancouver-Point Grey. Stay with us here at Roundhouse Radio 98.3.